Hello and welcome back. I know for you it's probably only been a few seconds since you watched the last lecture, but for me it's been over 6 months since I recorded this course, and I am now returning to extend the course to make it longer. I also noticed several things that I didn't cover that really should be covered by a basic writing course. And in this lecture, I want to talk about dialogue. Not necessarily how do you write good dialogue, that's another issue entirely, but how do you write dialogue in the first place? We're going to touch a little bit about how to write good dialogue too, but maybe there will be a whole nother course on that. First, let's talk about how to write it. You begin dialogue by using double quotes. Okay, that's traditional in English, and that you use double quotes. Sometimes quotes or the quoted dialogue can begin with an em dash or a long dash. Very infrequently is it put in single quotes. So double quotes is usually it. And you'll notice that Word puts in smart quotes. It curves the quotes in different directions. It uses a different opening and closing quote. Depending on your editor, it may just use straight quotes. But you begin a quote and then you say something like, hello, and put the period. You close it with punctuation, and then you put the ending quote. Now, this is a very short sentence for somebody to say, but you notice how the punctuation goes inside of the quotes. Now, what if we wanted to attribute this to somebody speaking? Right now, we have no idea who's speaking. What you do is you replace the period with a comma, put the quote back again, and then you say who's speaking. For instance, he said, and then put the period to terminate the sentence. This is the way that you write dialogue and attribute the dialogue to a person. Now let's say somebody responds, "How do you do?" And here it's more of a question, so we're going to put a question mark at the end rather than a semicolon. She said. Now notice that this he said, she said can get very boring after a while. So what you end up doing is you find new ways to say he said, she said to vary the dialogue. For instance, you might say, she replied. She quipped. She murmured. There's all kinds of ways that you can say she said, he said. In fact, you might even not get completely out of the saying part and say she puffed on her cigarette. Something like that, just to vary the he said, she said, and make it not occur. In fact, sometimes what you do is you just say he said on one of your pieces of dialogue to identify who's speaking, and then you know who's replying is going to be she because he's done speaking, and you don't even have to attribute it. And from this point on, you can say, lovely evening out, period, and we can not attribute sentences, and the reader will assume that they alternate back and forth. Now, for some people, this gets kind of complicated, and they want to attribute everything, so they'll put she quipped, he announced, and so on, and you'll keep this going. Now, sometimes you want just a break in the dialogue, so we would say something like, hello, he said. Now, this is a new sentence, so we would begin it here. Now, notice that we start on the same paragraph with the rest of what they say. I like to keep entire paragraphs used for what one person says and use a paragraph break to what the next person says. So, lovely evening, he might say. And this gets continued on after the first sentence as a complete paragraph. Now, I don't often use exclamation marks when I write, but I do use it in dialogue to indicate that this is being shouted or in some way emphasized. So we say, get out of the room, and use an exclamation mark. Whoop, there we go. He demanded. Notice how, once again, we're varying. We haven't said once in our 4 pieces of dialogue. Instead, we used, actually, here we said it once, but then we quipped, we announced, and we demanded. So you want to vary it as you go through your dialogue. So this is the basics of writing dialogue. Just alternate, write new paragraphs. Um, this can continue on with more and more stuff that's written in multiple sentences. Use appropriate punctuation to separate your sentences. Have you been here long? He might continue. And keep all of it in double quotes. Notice here we've got more than one sentence in the double quotes. You just use one pair of double quotes to quote everything that they say. And then use quite often commas and he said or she said, but the not he said or she said. Make it quipped, announced, demanded, all of the various ways that you can say said instead of saying said. Of course, the other thing you'll want to do is change he and she to, for instance, if he was a captain, you might say, the captain said, or she actually use her name, Maria quipped. And in this way, you can eliminate the redundancy of he and she, as well as what they do, quipped, announced, demanded. Another thing to consider is including the person's name when you're speaking. For instance, hello, and then we can put the name of the person. What if it's Gloria? That would come after a comma. So we would actually have 2 commas in there. Hello, Gloria. The name is kind of an aside, so there's a slight pause. That's how I always tell where a comma should go is the pause in the conversation. So that's the basics of writing dialogue.